One of my favorite quotes about wealth is this: too many people waste their hard-earned money to buy things they don't need, to impress people they don't know or even like. The funny thing about money is that it costs us way too much, but very few can be found counting the cost. So let me say before we get to today's teaching from James that I believe Georgiana is one of the most generous churches that I've ever known. It is well respected and admired throughout our community and way beyond, even to the far reaches of the globe in terms of people and how they understand us. We are generous in our resources. We are generous in our time. We are generous in serving our community. Per capita, I believe we part more waters for others than almost any other church I know. People and pastors frequently come here to learn the principles of generosity from us. And the reason that we are generous is, by and large, we have collectively together bought into the theological premise that the church, and for that matter, every Christian, exists to give themselves away just as Christ on the cross gave himself fully away for us. We are living examples of what the Acts 2 church is supposed to look like. Every week we have an opportunity to leverage our lives and our love for Christ to impact others. All of this being said, I never want us to rest on what we did yesterday, or to think that the stench of apathy and complacency could ever find us. I want us to be on the guard against the schemes of the enemy that would cause us to take our eye off the kingdom ball. This is the reason for today's teaching. Not so much that we have a problem as a church, as much as that we need to continue to gird ourselves to protect ourselves from beginning to think, hey, we all that and we've done all that and all that. So let me say right up front that if you thought this summer's teaching from James has been personal, you ain't seen nothing yet. That's all I got to say. Nothing is more personal than our feelings about and around money, right? Nobody touches my money. Nobody talks about my money. Listen, when it comes to our resources, our finances, our talents, our time, and anything else that God has asked us to steward, if you do not have a plan, the enemy will for sure mess you up. Consumerism, materialism, greed are all emotional tools used by the enemy to create fear in us. Ayn Rand once said, money is only a tool. It will take you wherever you wish, but it will not replace you as the driver. It will not replace you as the driver. What I know about money is that it will wreck your life if you let it. To be very clear, it's not the amount that will mess you up. It's our feelings around the amount that twist things. This is the one area that I believe if you do not have a battle plan, an intentional focus to guard against self-indulgence, then you will soon find yourself drowning in the quicksand of hoarding your blessings. Both the presence and absence of wealth is a weak underbelly for the church and most Christians. It is the primary place of attack by our enemy. Tom Watson said, Satan loves to fish the troubled waters of a discontented heart. Which is why Paul tells us what? That we should learn to be content in all things, all things. So let's go to the book of James. It's such a uplifting and refreshing passage that we'll share this morning. I remember when we were sitting around the sermon planning table, none of the sermon preaching team wanted to touch this. And I for a moment said, we could skip it. I mean, we could just go like from 4 to 5-7, but no, we're going to do it. I'm going to do it. So here's what it says. Verse 1, chapter 5. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth is rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay your workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Very edifying and encouraging passage for us to read this morning. Now, right away, you read that first verse. What did it say? It said, now listen, you rich people. And some of you in the room went, whoo, man, I thought they were going to talk about me this morning. But man, I am so glad now they're not going to talk about me. Man, because here's the deal. Nobody, no matter how much you have, ever thinks they're rich. Nobody ever does, right? People read this passage and they think, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not rich. Here's the deal. Wealth is relative. I have known some people without money that feel like they're more spiritual than those who have it. They aren't. On the other hand, I've known people with money who become defensive about having to have it. They don't have to be. All wealth is relative. A couple of years ago, I was able to join a small group of pastors. About 5 of us got together. One of us knew a person in Zimbabwe that was going to go to seminary. And so we got together, pooled our resources, and put him through seminary. Right? It was just a great opportunity for us to invest in somebody else's call in a faraway place and to help him do that. Well, he prepared to graduate and was graduating, and we got this idea, wouldn't it be great to bring him to America so we could meet him, celebrate with him. He had never left his country. He had never flown on an airplane before. And so we brought him here and had a great visit. During his visit, he said a number of profound things, all of which humbled us beyond words, right? I mean, he looked into our lives and what appeared to be resources that were limitless at our disposal, that we had let time erode the awareness of, right? We had just not become aware. But here's what blew him away. Everywhere we went in the car, he could not believe that our cars had houses. He could not believe that we built houses for our cars, right? He would go places and he would look at a garage and he would immediately think about how many people in his country could live in that space. I'm telling you, awkward, humbling, indefensible were us as we were going, man, he's right, right? And to be honest, I didn't go home and tear down my garage, right? So, but now when I drive in, I do ask God to forgive me for having one. So, I mean, here's the thing. Most of us in the room are some of the wealthiest people in the world. Everything is relative. It's the biblical story of the widow's mite where Jesus points out the generosity of the poor widow despite the large sum given by the wealthy man. All things are relative. The principle of the tithe is to eliminate the ambiguity of generosity. It levels the playing field of relativity, right? It eliminates the appearance of generosity and deflects favoritism. The reality is no matter how much money we have, someone has a lot more. No matter how little money you have, someone has far less. So we can be sure that the word of James for us this morning is for all of us. Now, to be clear, this is not a condemnation on wealth. It's a warning against wealth that is a bear trap waiting to be sprung on the unsuspecting. Listen, this is not the first time the Bible speaks clearly and passionately and boldly about the dangers of wealth used poorly. Can I preach the scriptures a moment? Can you just indulge me? Yes, can I preach the scriptures just for a moment? Let me just preach the scriptures, the word of God. Deuteronomy 24 says, do not take advantage of a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether that worker is a fellow Israelite or a foreigner residing in one of your towns. Pay them their wages each day before sunset because they are poor and counting on it. Otherwise, they may cry to the Lord against you and you will be guilty of sin. Ecclesiastes 5:10, the richest man in all of history penned these words. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 6, can I preach the word of God, church? He says that you cannot serve two masters. You cannot love God and money. Jesus encounters a rich young ruler in Matthew 19. And this guy is standing in the very presence of the Son of God, and he chooses his stuff over salvation. Paul writes to the young pastor Timothy in 1 Timothy 6. He says, for the love of money is the root of all evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced himself with many griefs. He goes on to say, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant and not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. Jesus goes on in Revelation 3:17. He says this at the church of Laodicea, you say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and I do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked because of your boastful arrogance. And then in James chapter 1, verse 27, the brother of Jesus says, religion that God Father accepts as pure and faultless as this is to look out for orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Jesus Christ says amen. Right? So, I don't know, we get to this passage and we go, man, it feels harsh. I'm going, really? Have you read the book? It's in the book. Can I tell you how much I love the Word of God? Right? The Word of God explodes off the pages, man, every page. Listen, from Old Testament to New Testament, the Bible is full of warnings about this manner of wealth. I believe that Christianity demands a way of life that expresses itself in a concern for the marginalized and the oppressed. Christians are to champion the needs of others, to stand in the gap for the hungry and the naked and the helpless. This is the heart of our communion offerings. It is the entire heart of our missions ministry. We are to love one another in whatever way it takes. Listen, the fact is there's a little bit of hoarder in all of us, right? A little bit of hoarder in all of us. It doesn't just have to be with wealth. We all have places in our lives where we allow a spirit of scarcity to trump a spirit of generosity. A spirit of scarcity is all about fear. A spirit of generosity is all about trust. Again, it's not always about wealth, although this passage is. It's not always. We can be hoarders when it comes to unconditional love, when it comes to grace, when it comes to forgiveness, when it comes to kindness, and certainly when it comes to generosity. People have a tendency to hold back for themselves what God intended to pass through them to others. The very nature of sin is to withhold, it is to hide, it is to hoard. Oh, look around. People hoard and hold things back all the time. They hold back affection. They hold back truth. They hold back their feelings. They hold back their dreams and their fears. To go all in for Christ is to be vulnerable, and nothing in our culture promotes vulnerability. Nothing. The point James is trying to make here is how we get our money, how we guard our money, and how we give our money reveals what's truly in our hearts. We live in a world where there's a real possibility that our accountant, the person that prepares our taxes, knows more about your spiritual life than your pastor or your prayer partner or your accountability partner. Dee Dee and I have always known that the person that we witness to the loudest is our accountant. He knows what I do for a living. He knows what the rules are, right? He can see. The second person is Stacy down the hallway, right? Because she also knows what I'm at. The truth is, our money, it talks. It blabs, right? It gets carried away. Our mission teams to Kentucky can tell you a thing or two about hoarding. If you've been on a mission trip to Kentucky, you know that's a serious problem in that area that we go. It's everywhere there. Sadly, where they see it most frequently is in ministries and churches that have become a dumping ground for used trash and a hoarding spot for things that might possibly, perhaps, conceivably, feasibly, someday, one day, get used by someone somewhere, right? If you think you're immune to hoarding, just pause a moment and think about what's in your garage. I've seen some of your garages. Listen, I get it too. I pull it in my garage every day. First of all, does it look like I surf? And we have 2 surfboards in our house that belong to a child that has not resided in our house in more than 12 years. There they stand as a living testimony to something I do not need in my garage. Listen, we all have it, right? Listen, Dee Dee and I want to be clear. We believe some things have a second life. There's things that can be passed on and shared. Dee Dee and I share things with Goodwill. We share things with the A+ thrift store. We do. But Dee Dee has a rule at our house. You can buy a new shirt, but when it goes in your closet, a shirt in your closet has to come out. I don't care which one it is, but if one goes in, one has to come out. That's her rule. Now, I don't know if it's good stewardship or closet management. But it's a rule. It's a rule at our house. The problem for Christians is sometimes we give away things that should go in the trash. It's why every tangible outreach we've ever done here is about new and not used. I learned my lesson the hard way 13 years ago here at this church. I was standing in my closet one day and I looked around and I had all these sweatshirts. I had 10, 12 sweatshirts, right? So I thought, we're going to encourage people to clean out their closets because if you live in Florida, you don't need 12 sweatshirts, period, right? One would last you a lifetime in this state, right? So we decided we would collect sweatshirts and that we would do this. So they started coming in. Now, this is 13 years ago. They started coming in, and they showed up with, holes in them and permanent stains and inappropriate sayings on the front of them, right? First of all, I was like, in whose house was this in, right? Right? So what happens is that I had to tell church people that you can't give like this, right? It's a rule now that we don't give like that. But it's become a common cultural mindset to generosity in our culture, right? Something is better than nothing. And those people You know those people, right? Those people that we're better than, those people ought to just be thankful that I gave something at all. Listen, we should never, ever give Jesus Christ second fruits. You read the story in Genesis. Do you want me to read that? So I can read that story. It does not go well. You bring a second fruit to God, it does not end well. And yet it happens all the time in the North American church. Sadly, our culture has made it socially acceptable for us to feel generous without actually being generous at all. There is a difference between God's storehouse and man's warehouse. Richard Green, that heads the mission in Kentucky, says to our teams all the time, he says, you have to ask yourself whether you're a bowl or a funnel. Are you a bowl or a funnel to what God gave you? Right? Think on that. Chew on that. So let me share a personal story. Our oldest son, Kyle, says that it's a genetic and evolutionary obligated responsibility for all men to never turn down a free couch. Men are the only species created by God that drives down the road and sees a piece of used furniture laying on the roadside and instantly thinks about taking it home. Instantly thinks about it. I don't know if all men have some sort of man cave fantasy and a free couch launches that dream. Like, you couldn't sell your wife on it, but if it started with a free couch, it'd be like, hey baby, it was free. Right? So it's like a genetic, gender specific disorder that men have, right? So here's how this conversation with Kyle got started. A week ago, Saturday, Dee Dee and I went to move our youngest son, Chris, out of his Gainesville dump. Chris is going to do travel nursing. He's going to move. And so right after Chris, well, what you need to know about Chris before I say anything else is that he's cheap, he's frugal, he's tight. I think he gets it from his mother, whatever you call it. So upon graduation, Chris chooses to live with 6 guys in a house. I called it deflected adulting. That's what I called it, right? Now, to his credit, we could get all his worldly possessions into a single vehicle. He is not a hoarder. He doesn't own much. He just lives with people that are slobs, right? So the whole time, I walked into this house, I said, who lives like this, right? I mean, apparently 6 20-something men do. I mean, I've been to third world countries. I mean, it required a hazmat suit to go in the front door, right? There was not a direct path to walk. You had to step over things, step around things, right, to move from room to room. I thought for sure Dee Dee and I were going to need a tetanus shot after we left, right? I got in the car to come home. I looked at Dee Dee. I said, as soon as we get home, the tennis shoes go in the trash. I have no idea what's on the bottom of them, right? I do not want it in my house. There was a spot where the motorcycle got repaired inside the house. Trash overflowing from every can. No wonder we can't find him a wife, right? I could go on, right? I could go on. You get the picture. I told you, I said, if I was the owner, I walked into this, I would take some lighter fluid, squirt it in the living room, and light a match. I just let the whole thing go up, collect the insurance money. That's what I would do. So here's what brought this up. This is why we got on this subject. They had no less than 7 used couches in that house. 7, right? It was a forensic files gold mine. Right? I mean, I'm just telling you, there were cultures living on those couches, I'm sure, right? And here's what, they were so proud. They didn't buy a single one of them. Chris kept telling me, he says, Dad, we're not out any money. Right? He said, in fact, I think we can sell a couple of them. It was crazy. Listen, there was no amount of Michelle Croswell ingenuity or toss pillows that could fix any of those couches, right? Now to his credit, now that I've thrown Chris completely under the bus, he and a roommate, because this is how guys are, 4 of them bailed, right? So Chris and one other guy spent 17 hours and hired a professional clean crew to come in and clean that house. And when the property manager came, he said that he had never seen a property so clean. I'm telling you, it was a miracle of biblical proportions. I mean, parting the Red Sea pales in comparison to what I saw and somebody getting their full deposit back. I thought, that money is gone. So I have to say, Chris told me, it made me a little weepy, Chris told me, he assured me, he said, listen, the next roommate I have, will be my wife. And I was like, that's so sweet to hear. Thank you, Jesus. Right? So my point is this. You wondered how there would be a point. My point is this. We cling to things in a way that is not always healthy. I believe that if the North American church was dispensing grace in the same measure that God had dispensed it to us, then there would be no empty seats on Sunday morning. Hurting people would be healed, and we would be purging darkness with the light of Jesus Christ if we were even remotely exercising the grace that has been dispensed to us. Here's the problem, in my opinion. We all suffer from the comparison trap. We are people prone to comparing ourselves and our lives to other people way too much, and social media isn't helping. Social media has become a place where people present their perfection, but in truth, it's an incomplete picture of the real story. So we compare our underwhelming reality to someone else's staged, cropped, filtered, photoshopped life and end up feeling terrible about our life. Social media is the perfect platform to pretend and to pose and to perform, all in an effort to bolster our shaky self-esteem, to hide our broken marriages, or to spin our public image. Way too often, we are measuring our success by how we measure up to other people. Far too many people in this world, if they have less than their neighbor, they think they're a failure. If they have more than their neighbor, they think they're a success. I've seen success ruin people. We've all seen it. Young rock star gets everything she's ever wanted and then crashes and burns. Young athlete signs a big contract, then parties his future away. A business grows bigger and bigger than anyone expected, and the owner becomes reckless with expansion plans. A person comes to Christ and lives in the overflow of God's blessing and then begins to feel entitled to it and soon thinks it is by his own hand that he has come this way, and God removes his hand and his life crashes. We've all known and read these stories. As a pastor for more than 20 years, I can tell you I've seen people ruined by success, more of them ruined by success, than anybody who's been ruined by suffering. Suffering tends to push people towards God. Success tends to push people away, right? For every person you can find that can handle pain of suffering, you'll find very few that can handle fame. The praise goes to their head, and it destroys them. Comfort always erodes perspective. Our comfort erodes perspective, and it kills thanksgiving in us. C.S. Lewis said that we don't actually take pride or find joy in the possessions itself, but just in having more of it than someone else. No longer are we content to win, but we want to crush our opponents. I'm talking about you Gator fans out there, right? It's not just enough to be thin. We have to be thinner than she is. It's not just enough to be ripped and chiseled out of stone. We have to be more ripped than he is. We have to be richer and smarter and more popular and more accomplished to feel good about ourselves. This way of thinking is counterintuitive to this book. It's not in this book. True story, one of our college students shared with me last year that she met a girl who was really nice, and she really did everything she could to establish and initiate a friendship with her. And at every turn, this girl just kind of rejected her, put her off, just didn't want to have anything to do with her. The girl wasn't mean, just kind of off-putting, just kind of deflecting of the relationship. Finally, one day, she worked up the courage to say, listen, I just want to know, I've been trying to be friends with you. I can't figure out why we can't be friends. And here was her response. She said to her, if I had a friend as pretty as you, no one would ever notice me. Can you imagine that? That you've been condemned for something you cannot control. That somebody would judge you by the exterior, not by the interior. But that's the world we live in. Can you imagine what that does to somebody's self-esteem? Listen, anytime that we're tempted to put the letters ER at the end of a descriptor or tempted to use the word more in our comparisons, sirens and alarms and red flashing lights should go off in our life. Things like, I am wealthier, I am faster, I am stronger, I am smarter, I am skinnier, I am more beautiful, I am more influential, I am more spiritual, I am more popular. Using comparisons to define our value is intrinsically insecure. It's a dead giveaway that our core values are wrong. The thing is we probably do this and we don't even realize it. This is the point of James 5:6. We get and we have at the expense of someone else. And this should never happen, church, but it's currently the acceptable course of action to be an American. Comparison is a silent killer. It steals our joy and undermines our relationships. It causes us to take for granted what we have, to criticize events we should celebrate, reject people we should learn from, and resent ideas we should embrace. It drives greed and materialism at the expense of our own spiritual health. Finally, let me say this. I believe true giving is infused with love. When we know the depths of God's love for us, then we are empowered to love generously with our resources, our time, our talent, and our passions. To give from a surrendered place of faith, hope, and love, rather than from a posture of expectation of return, is a profound risk in our culture. We so often think of sacrificial giving as giving till it hurts, or some percentage of our wealth that we think we can't afford to give away. I'm beginning to think these are just other worldly ways of making excuses about hoarding what we have. Dee Dee and I want to give till it feels good, till it heavenly feels good. We want to anticipate the joy that it will create in someone else's life. We want to give in order to see a holy ripple effect happen in our community and beyond. These are the principles that are behind giving at our home. True biblical giving, which is to say sacrificial giving, cannot be measured in amounts, percentages, or otherwise. It is the manifestation of a surrendered soul in love with God for the benefit of others. It is the manifestation of a surrendered soul so in love with God for the benefit of others. When giving to God for others is done in this fashion, it cannot be faked. And most of you who do this know this, whether you give your money or your time, you know that when you give in extraordinary ways, that it somehow comes back on you in ways that you hadn't anticipated, that only does what? Fuels you to give more. Because it feels so good, right? This is where the phrase, you can't outgive God, comes from. This is what this means. People who experience this know that they've entered into the economy that cannot be explained with mathematical accounting. Around here, our leaders call it God's math. We can't explain God's math. We just can't. Can't explain generosity that happens. That's happening at a rate around here, we can't even celebrate it. It's happening so fast. In Philippians, Paul talks about a gift that was given to his ministry. And he says this, they are a fragrant offering, speaking of that church. They are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God. And may my God meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory. This is the warning of James 5. Hoarded wealth rots, and according to this book, becomes a stench upon the hoarder, while generosity is a fragrant offering that rises up to please God.